Oklahoma's coal industry is struggling. Coal mining has been in a steady decline for decades as rising costs, new pollution rules, and competition from natural gas put pressure on the industry. Economically depressed areas of eastern Oklahoma are now pinning their hopes on increased exports to China and state tax incentives that supporters and opponents alike credit with keeping the industry alive.
Coal was once king in eastern Oklahoma. When oil prices skyrocketed in the 1970s, Oklahoma's coal production boomed. Much of the increase was attributed to fears that the U.S. was facing a shortage of oil and natural gas, leading former President Jimmy Carter to call for a transition to other forms of energy.
Because we are now running out of gas and oil, we must prepare quickly for a third change, to strict conservation and to the renewed use of coal.
In 1978, Congress passed the Power Plant and Industrial Fuel Use Act, effectively banning the use of natural gas to generate electricity.
That happened to be at a time in our company's history where we were in need of building new generation. And with that mandate, there were really only two choices at that time: coal or nuclear.
Bryant Alford is a spokesman for Oklahoma Gas and Electric, which owns and operates two of the state's largest coal-fired power plants, including this facility near Muskogee. Coal-fired power plants still account for more than 40% of the electricity in Oklahoma, but coal has fallen behind natural gas as the primary source for electrical generation. Coal was dealt another setback last year when President Obama called for stricter emission controls on power plants that use coal.
For the sake of our children and the health and safety of all Americans, I'm directing the Environmental Protection Agency to put an end to the limitless dumping of carbon pollution from our power plants and complete new pollution standards for both new and existing power plants.
Oklahoma now has 6 coal-fired power plants, almost all of them using coal imported from Wyoming.
There was a period when we did use some Oklahoma coal in our generation, but it proved to be incompatible. It's simply, our plants weren't designed to burn an Oklahoma-type coal.
Whitney Pearson with the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign believes coal is on borrowed time in the U.S.
Utilities are moving beyond coal and phasing out their use of coal and their reliance on coal in favor of cleaner energy sources that don't pollute as much.
Pearson maintains the outlook for Oklahoma-produced coal is even worse.
Coal from Oklahoma is high in sulfur content, and so most of the coal that we use in Oklahoma to burn in these power plants comes from Wyoming. In fact, OG&E sends $320 million, or they did in 2012, sent $320 million out of state to Wyoming to purchase coal.
Numbers from the Oklahoma Department of Mines bear out the decline in the coal industry. Coal production has fallen from a high of 5.73 million tons in 1981 to just over 1 million tons in 2012. That translates to fewer jobs in eastern Oklahoma's coal-bearing regions.
Today, coal mines employ, the last number I saw was about 200 people at most, and production is way down from the 1980s.
Gene Perry is policy director for the Oklahoma Policy Institute. Perry says besides being high in sulfur content, Oklahoma-produced coal has other things working against it.
It's also more expensive to get out of the ground than a large coal-producing state like Wyoming, for example. So, Oklahoma could buy all of its coal from Wyoming and ship it here, and it would still be cheaper than the coal that we dug up in Oklahoma.
In an attempt to reverse the industry's decline, the Oklahoma legislature in 1987 passed a law requiring utilities to use at least 10% Oklahoma coal in their fuel mix, a law the U.S. Supreme Court struck down 5 years later.
And the original intent of that was to save the Oklahoma coal industry because it was frankly uncompetitive. Coal from Wyoming in particular was much cheaper, and so there was the threat that power plants were just going to stop buying Oklahoma coal and get it all from this place that could produce it more cheaply.
The only power plant still using Oklahoma-produced coal as a primary source of energy is the AES Shady Point plant in LaFleur County, which was specifically designed to burn high-sulfur Oklahoma coal. Lundy Kiger is Director of Government Relations for AES Shady Point, which sells electricity directly to OG&E.
We would buy approximately 1.2 million tons a year, and we did that from 1991 to 2008, and we were actually utilizing 60+% of all the coal produced in the state at that time.
Shady Point benefited from a $2 a ton tax credit for using Oklahoma coal, but when OG&E began paying lower prices for Wyoming coal, it also cut the price it paid to Shady Point.
That is when the tax credit became important, because it ended up, AES Shady Point was losing about $8.5 million a year between the difference of what we paid for Oklahoma coal versus what we were reimbursed. And that put us in a very difficult situation.
Lawmakers responded by bumping the tax credit to $5 a ton and later added a $5 a ton credit for companies which mine coal. Kiger says the tax incentive has saved the coal industry in eastern Oklahoma.
We value the coal tax credit very highly, because without that, it would not be economically feasible for us to be able to continue using Oklahoma coal. The coal jobs in this area range from $18 to $25 an hour, which is very good. And the average salary of an Oklahoma coal miner at GCI, where we buy our coal, the average is $62,000, and that's $21.50 an hour with benefits.
Kiger also credits a ripple effect for boosting the area's economy.
We get all of our coal in by truck, which creates a lot of other jobs. Those trucking jobs average about $40,000 a year. And then you've got quite a few other trucking jobs or indirect jobs, not just truck drivers, but you got loaders, you got need for heavy machinery mechanics.
Kiger is also encouraged by recent developments in Leflore County, including plans by Oro Mining to create up to 400 coal mining jobs in what the company is calling the Heavener Project.
The last count I had, Oro had invested about $12 million in that project so far. You know, I don't care where you're at. When you see a company investing $12 million, that's a lot of money.
The coal mine near Heavener will primarily be exported overseas rather than being burned in the U.S., but Kiger says the region will still benefit.
You know, whether it is used here at AES Shady Point or whether it's used, you know, in Australia, China, wherever it may be, it's going to be Oklahoma coal miners that are producing that coal, and it's going to be Oklahoma jobs, and those labor dollars are going to stay here.
Despite the uptick in employment, the tax credit has its critics, including State Representative David Denk, who called it a poster child for just about everything that is wrong with this system. Others question whether providing a tax incentive to the coal industry is a good use of the state's resources.
In the most recent report from the Tax Commission, it cost about nearly $300,000. And that was in 2011 and 2012, but then in the year just before that, it cost more than $4 million. But I think you have to ask whether it's a good use of taxpayer money to be subsidizing an industry that just is not competitive without that subsidy.
Ann Perry isn't convinced the credit has turned the industry around.
I think you could say that it has allowed it to keep limping along and allowing what little production of coal there is in Oklahoma to continue. And I think most likely if the credit went away, then the few mines in Oklahoma would close.
The coal tax credit was set to expire this year, but lawmakers passed a bill last session extending the incentive until 2021 and making the credit refundable, meaning companies can receive direct payouts from the state after their tax liability has been reduced to zero.